We are back covering a key bit of information that every fish keeper should know, and this will give you the building blocks or the starting point to start your fish off correctly when they're in your care. Now, as much as it might seem like a boring bit of information and not that exciting, it's a key bit of info that everyone in the fish keeping industry or world should know. And that's because if you get it wrong or you misjudge it slightly, it could spell disaster for your fish, and no one wants that. So whatever you want to call it, whether you call it acclimating or acclimatizing, who cares? It's all the same thing. But there are a few bits of really important information I want to give you first before actually going to acclimatize these new pets that I've got today. One bit of info I want to give you that isn't really info, but it's definitely worth knowing, is you will see this point argued about all over the hobby. I do it this way, you're stupid if you do it that way, I've been doing it this way for 30 years. That's not really my way of doing things. I'm going to give you all the info. I'm going to give you the three main ways that we use to acclimatise fish and the reasons why we done each one, the pros and the cons to each way of doing it. So there are three common ways of doing it, two of which I'm going to show you today, which is the floating bag method. That's going to be over there with the new cherry shrimp. And then there's a drip acclimatisation method, which we're going to do downstairs on my new panda shrimp going into the panda guppy bowl aquarium. The third way of doing it is like a cut and drop method or a drop and plop. That sounds really wrong now I've said that out loud. Essentially, it is just cutting the bag and dropping the fish in. Now, there is reasons that you would do that, and I am going to explain them nearer the end of this video once I get to that part. Why do we acclimatise fish? Well, the reason is, as much as the water looks very similar in our aquariums, there are so many variables, from nutrient levels to hardnesses to mineral levels. There are so many variables within your fish tank. Now, the problem is with that, if you take a fish from, let's say, a pH of 8 and drop it into a tank with a pH of, say, less than 7, that's going to be a huge shock for the fish, and it's going to be a massive difference for them. If the parameters are fairly similar, it's probably not going to be that much of a shock, so they won't even bat an eyelid at it. Not that they've got eyelids, but you get what I mean. Now, there is one key thing to understand before getting into all of this, and that is what happens when you open up the top of the bag. Now, I'm going to simplify it because I can't be bothered with the science, and all of you will have clicked off by the time I've explained it all, so I'm just going to keep it really simple. So from your fish being in the bag for an extended period of time, they're going to be going to the toilet, causing ammonia, pee and poo and all that loveliness. Now, with that, they'll be releasing CO2, which will be causing the pH in the bag to drop. Both sound a bit worrying, but both work together really well. With the pH dropping and the ammonia going up, it actually means that the ammonia is less toxic, so the fish won't have a problem while they're in the bag and that pH is low. The problem comes when you open the bag. Now, opening the bag means that all that CO2 comes out of the bag, you get a fresh influx of air, and the pH starts to rise. The problem with that is then the ammonia becomes toxic, so you do have to be very careful. For fish just coming down the road, like the shrimps I'm going to show you today, it's not too much of an issue. They've been in the bag for maybe half an hour, maybe an hour tops. For fish going longer distances where there's been a lot more waste produced and the pH will be a lot lower because they've been in that bag functioning, that's where you can get the problem, and that's where the end method of the cut and drop method comes into play. So I hope all that info makes sense. I would go more into depth into this subject. Let me know in the comments if you do want me to go into it, but I think you would start clicking off if I started going into the science of what happens in the bag. Like I say, you just got to be aware. Open bag, gas, problems, ammonia, toxic, burning gills, all of that sort of thing. So you just need to be aware of it. Firstly, I'm going to show you the floating bag method. It's probably the most popular method in the hobby, I think. Might be different where you're from. I can only talk for England. I'm pretty sure it's the most popular here. But I'm going to show you that one first. Then we'll get on to dripping and then the drop and plop thing that I'm a little bit freaked out by now. So this is the tank they're going to be going into, the Chilli Rasbora tank. We have got our little cherry shrimp. This is one of the Made in Aquatics heat bags that just keeps them really warm, and it's all dark inside, so it's perfect for sort of transporting fish. The first thing we need to do is light acclimatise the creatures that are in this bag. The problem being is they'll have been in this dark bag, obviously these for only a little bit of time, but yours might have been in a box overnight or for a fair few hours. So pulling them out and putting them into a really bright room straight away will stress them out. So you can see I've got the shrimps just wrapped up in this brown bag here, so all I'm going to do is open the top of that, let a bit of light in so they can see what they're doing and it doesn't blind them, and we're going to leave them like that for 5 or 10 minutes. They've had 5 minutes or so acclimatising to the light. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the lights on the tank. And then what we can do is get these guys out and get them floating. Oh, look at them. They're so cool. Now that the light is off, we can float them in the tank. The reason we turn the light off, well, can you imagine being that close to a super bright LED and not being able to get away from it? Wouldn't be fun for anyone. So that's the reason we turn off the light. It just lets the stress levels lower down a little bit. Floating the bag like this just allows the temperatures to equalize between the bag and your aquarium, so eventually they should be the same. Again, there is no real set time for this. If you've come 5 minutes down the road, it might be the same temperature. If they've been shipped overnight, they might be a little bit cooler. If you live in a cooler area, they might be cold. If you live in a warmer area, so on. Anyway, so on and so on. So you just want to give them a little bit of time to acclimatise to this temperature. Normally about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how different it is. We've left this bag for about 15 minutes floating now, so the temperatures are equal. Like I say, they are only from down the road, so the temperatures have equalised quite nicely. Now we're ready to get this knot off and start the parameter side of acclimatising. What we've got to do is get the knot off the top of this bag. Now I might be able to undo this rubber band. Nope. So we will just cut that off. Ta-da! Now what you want to do with this is roll the sides of the bag down to create this sort of ring of air, I suppose. A bit like rolling up your sleeves or rolling up your trousers to go in the sea. You are just creating a little floating ring. With the bag settled on the surface of the water, we could now add something like tap water safe. This does have additives in it to help the slime coat of the fish and to help de-stress them. Obviously these are shrimp and they've only just come from up the road, so I'm not going to be adding this at this time, but it certainly would help if your fish have been in there a while. What we're going to start doing at this point is we're going to start adding water to the bag. So this is a little quarter cup measure, and I'm going to be doing one of these every sort of 4 or 5 minutes for the next half an hour. You do have to remember though that this is size dependent. If the bag is massive with loads of fish in it, you might be wanting to put a half cup or a whole cup measure in every 5 minutes. I'm going to do this over the next 30 minutes and that should slowly fill up this bag. While you're doing this, always keep an eye on the animals that you're acclimatising. Obviously you don't want them to start gasping or start sort of freaking out and stressing out, because then the best place for them might be in the tank, but we're going to get into that at the end of the video. Now we're about halfway through, I'm just going to readjust this sort of collar on the bag. Because the water's now filled up a little bit more, it's a bit heavier and it's not floating as well. I'm also going to remove a little bit of water from the bag, just so that we've got more space to add more water over the next 15 to 20 minutes. There we go, it's been about 35, maybe 40 minutes of regular putting in of water. It's not really a word, is it? But hey, you know what I mean. Like I say, the aim of this is to get whatever parameters are in your tank to be the same as whatever's in the bag. Again, there's loads of different things that you'll hear around online, and it is just dependent on who you listen to and what way you want to do it. Some people will put more water in, but maybe every 10 minutes. I always like to do it less water, but more often. That way I can keep an eye on the animals, and I know that it's just a gradual acclimatization for them. Now that they are fully acclimatized and the parameters should be exactly the same in the bag as to what's in the tank, it's getting them out. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do this. The first way is to just start gently scooping. You don't really want to put any of the shop water into your fish tank if you can. So we can scoop them out one by one, or maybe a few by a few, and then slowly release them into the aquarium. This can be tricky though, because certain catfish get stuck to the bags and some fish can be stuck in the corners. I've actually got a tiny baby shrimp in here which could be a pain to get out, so I'm going to show you the other way that you can do it as well. The other way you can do it is straining them through a bucket and a net. Now this can be tricky. It's ideal to have 3 hands here. If you can get someone to help you, it's much easier. But someone holds the net over the bucket and you can gently pour them through. But you do need to be gentle. Now luckily my net is big enough that it fits side to side in this bucket, so it holds itself on quite nicely. All we're going to do is we're going to pick up the bag and I'm going to grip the top, and I'll show you on camera. Grip the top like so. So you've got a good grip holding on to that. We are then going to turn them gently upside down, and then I'm going to slowly release the water in through the net. This way it's not a big influx of water, it's not a big splash, they're not going to get hammered around inside all that water, and you can just gently let them fall into the net. Now some catfish and some shrimps and things will get stuck to the net. No they won't, they'll get stuck to the bag. So it's always worth checking that there is none left in any of the corners or anything like that. Everyone's out, so we're fine to go. Let's get them in. And that is it. All of them acclimatised. So I've just come back after a couple of hours of letting them settle in the tank in the dark with no lights on, and I've just flicked the lights on and they're all merrily buzzing about, happily finding food and grazing off the algae, so that's perfect. Now I will show you how the drip acclimatisation method works. Next up, I'm going to show you how to drip acclimatise animals. Now, this is good for sensitive species. It's used quite a lot in the saltwater side of the hobby because, yeah, salinities and things like that, they like to give them a slower introduction to it. The one thing you've got to remember is the whole ammonia turning into toxic ammonia when you open the bag thing from the start, because if you're going to pour them into a bucket and leave them there for 45 minutes, if that ammonia goes toxic in the bucket, it could cause a problem. And I say could, it will cause a problem. So just be mindful still of that ammonia thing in your head and keep a close eye on your animals. But this is a much sort of gentler way of acclimatising your animals to your tank. So the first few steps are exactly the same as what we've done on the bag acclimatisation process. We have got our panda shrimp in our bag. What we're going to do is we're going to light zip stuck. Oh, there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to light acclimatise them for a little bit first, probably again 5-10 minutes sort of thing, just to let them get used to the brighter lights of the home. Once that's done, then we will float them for about 10-15 minutes again, because you still want the temperatures to equalise. You will be dripping water into the bucket, but it might not be enough to bring that temperature up. So yeah, floating them on the surface for a good 15 minutes just means the temperatures will be the same. They've been sat for 5-10 minutes, they've got light acclimatised. That makes sense to me. What we're going to do, turn the lights off on this main tank. Oh, I just changed the light setting. There we go, turn them off. And we're going to give them that time, just sat on the surface, getting used to the temperature. Oh, they look so good. Can you see them? Look at them. There we go. Let's give them 15 minutes. So they've had 15 minutes to warm up, they all seem to be chilled out and seem to be sat down and the temperatures seem to be the same. So we are ready to start dripping. What we're going to do is get them out and get them into a bucket. We've got our bucket, we've got our bag of shrimp. So what I'm hoping to do is undo this knot. Well, I say knot, it's a rubber band. There we go. Oh no, don't put that down. It's gone. Now all we're going to do is roll down the sides and gently let them out into this bucket, not from a great height. Again, remember to check that no one's left behind, which they're not. There we go, they're ready to be dripped. Sometimes when you do a drip acclimatisation, there might not be enough water in the bucket. So sometimes you just need to tip the bucket on an angle, place something underneath the other side, just to make sure there's a pool of water deep enough for them. But I'm lucky, the bucket's quite sort of narrow at the bottom and there's a fair amount of water in there, so they're absolutely fine. Next, I'll show you how to set up the drip line. That's probably the weirdest thing to set up. There's actually only one thing you need to set up a drip line, and that is a length of airline. So this is just 6mm airline. So it's the stuff you run on your air pumps and sponge filters and things like that at home. You would put one end into the aquarium, and then down through the airline, you would tie knots like this. The tighter you tie them, the less water will come out of the other end of the airline. Now I'm a little bit more fancy than that because, I'll be honest, tying the knots just annoys me. So what I use these little airline clamps. I'll try and link them in the description. They're fairly simple and fairly easy to get hold of. The good thing with this is I can clamp one to the aquarium and I can clamp the other end and tighten it down until I get the right amount of drips. All we're going to do, chuck that airline in there, pop that clamp over the top, clamp that down onto the aquarium, like so, and that will hold that bit of airline underneath the water so we can use that as a siphon. Then the last step is just putting the other clamp onto the other end of airline, tightening it down a little bit, and this is what we're going to use to control our flow. Now, unfortunately, you can try and put the inlet of the airline onto the filter outlet, but most of the time I just give it a little suck. That's the easiest way. There you go. So you can see how fast that's coming out. So if I just keep turning it down, that's off. And you're aiming probably for around, 3 to 4 drips a second, roughly. Again, it doesn't need to be a perfect science, but you're just going to let that drip over the course of the next maybe 3/4 of an hour to an hour. Like I say, this method is really good for sensitive species because, you can slow it right down or speed it right up. If you're going from different pHs or you're worried about the fish or shrimp acclimatizing to your tank, this is a real gentle way of doing it. Now it's just a waiting game of letting the water drip in, slowly filling up that water and getting the parameters to the same level as your aquarium. A few things you need to sort of keep an eye on really is always keep an eye on the animals you're acclimatising, and also keep an eye on the water level in your aquarium. You may obviously drain too much water out, and depending on your filter setup, yeah, you just need to be aware of it. It's not one of those things that I would sort of set it all up and then just forget about it for an hour. I would be constantly coming back to check in on them. There is no set time to how long you should leave this for. You'll see numbers anywhere of 30, 45 minutes up to a couple of hours, depending on who's talking and what species they're talking about. Normally I aim for the 45-minute to about an hour mark, and that seems to work absolutely fine. One thing to remember though is the temperature. If you've got them on a cold floor, or maybe it's like a stone floor, or you've got a back door open and the draft is blowing over them, you don't want that water in the bucket to drop in temperature compared to your aquarium, because then when netting them out, you could let them go through temperature shock. It's quite an easy thing to test because obviously you can just use a thermometer, dip it in the bucket, dip it in the tank, and check that the temperatures are the same. They've been dripping for about 45 minutes now, and they're doing really well. They're all wandering about and sort of, yeah, looking normal, I suppose you would say. So now the case is just to net them out and get them into the aquarium. It's as simple as that. So let's remove our airline. Just remember that will hold water, so you don't want to tip it on the floor because there will be an amount of water in that line. I'm going to put that in that bag over there. Done. Now, we've just got to net them out. When catching out of a bucket, it is always worth having two nets because one can do the chasing and one can do the catching, and you can almost use one as a keep net to keep this fish or shrimp in. But there we go. That is the group of, I think, 10 I got in the end. I can't remember what I said to Cheryl now, how many to catch out. There we go. So they're all released. I'm going to give them a couple of hours just to settle down before I turn the lights back on. But that's it. That's the drip acclimatization done. So there you go. You can see I've given them a couple of hours now. I've just flicked the lights back on for the first time, and you can see they're all buzzing around. They're feeding off of the rocks. Oh, they're looking so good. Those colors are amazing. They fit this tank so well. Now, both those methods are really good if your fish or shrimp have only been in the bag for a little bit of time, maybe up to a couple of hours. But if they've been in there longer, the cut and drop method might be better for you. Now, I'm not going to display the cut and drop method because in all honesty, it is as it sounds. You would turn the lights off, you would let them temperature acclimate. Once that's done, you would cut the top, net the fish out and get it in the tank. Leave the lights off for a couple of hours and then all should be fine. But this isn't something I would do for every fish that I bring into my tanks. So you remember that bit at the start about like fish producing ammonia, the CO2 reducing the pH, but that's good because the ammonia is less toxic and pH are lower, and as soon as you open the bag. Anyway, you remember that bit from the start. That is the reason you would pretty much use the cut and drop method. If your fish have been in there for 20, 24 hours, maybe longer, then the cut and drop method is probably the best way to go. Just because as soon as you open that bag, the amount of ammonia that's going to be in there and also the amount the pH is going to have dropped is going to cause a way more aggressive swing than just coming down the road maybe half an hour to an hour. So if you're using one of the methods I've shown you in this video and then all of a sudden your fish start acting, erratically, or they start gasping or jumping or just not being right, you are probably better getting them out of that bag and into the tank ASAP. The reason for this is there's obviously something in the water, in that bag or bucket, that is causing them a problem. They are not happy with it. I've seen it done before for some strange reason. About 10 years ago, tiger barbs used to be awful for it. I just remember every time we got a bag of tiger barbs in, we used to have to watch them like a hawk because they would be fine 1 second and all of a sudden they'd be all gasping. So it does happen, and that's why I'd always say to keep a real close eye when you're acclimatizing these fish or shrimp. When you're looking at doing a cut and drop, remember, light acclimatise them, temperature acclimatise them, cut the top, net them out, put them in the tank. Leave the lights off for a long time just to let them settle. The whole reason for the cut and drop method is the fish are better in your clean aquarium than they are in that dirty bag that is going to turn very toxic as soon as you open it. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this for every fish, and now you have the knowledge hopefully to work out which of the methods is going to be best for you and the situation. I use all three, in all honesty. If I'm travelling miles with a fish, I might get home, and if it needs it, I'll be cutting and dropping that fish into a dark aquarium and just letting them settle down. But if I'm only coming 20 minutes down the road or an hour down the road, I'll probably take a little bit more time and acclimatise and messing around with the fish and letting them settle down. There is obviously a school of thought to think that, oh, well, you know, you're only half an hour down the road, surely the water won't be very different. But I can guarantee you, these two tanks are from the same tap water supply. I guarantee you, because of the amount of botanicals in this one and the lack of botanicals in this one will more than likely be softer than this one. So yeah, the shop up the road is using the same tap water as me, but my tanks will still be different. So there you are, the 3 different methods I use for acclimatizing animals to my aquariums. They're all fairly simple, and now hopefully I have given you all my knowledge that is stuck in my brain, and you can make an informed decision, there it is, on what you need to do. You just got to take each situation as each situation. Some people will get into a trap of doing one over and over again, but like I say, if it works for you, it works for you. Keep doing what you need to do. But you now have all of the info to go away and let your fish settle in as best as they can. I think that's it. I hope that's it. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want to know on the subject. I might do a video on the whole ammonia open bag thing a little bit more in depth, but we'll see how that goes. It's probably a very boring subject, but I'll see if I can make it entertaining somehow. I'll see you in the next one.